Welcome to Echo and Ash, and thank you for tuning in to another original audio experience. Today, we are continuing the storyline titled Ghosts in the Snow. This is episode 4. Please sit back, relax, and let the story unfold.
18th to 24th of February, 2028. The warmth of the Yagodnoye Provincial Clinic was a physical anesthetic. It was a deep, penetrating heat that didn't just thaw the ice from their gear, but seemed to soothe the raw, frayed edges of their nerves. The air, thick with the comforting, institutional sense of antiseptic, floor wax, and a distant cabbage soup, was the very antithesis of the sterile, empty wilderness they had fled at Lake Jack, London. It was the smell of humanity, however isolated and rustic, and it was the most welcome thing Ben Carter had smelled in his life. Dr. Ivanov was a man perfectly hewn for his environment. Broad-shouldered and bearded, with the large, capable hands of someone as accustomed to repairing a diesel generator as setting a fractured bone, he radiated an air of weary competence. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, held a kindness that had not been eroded by the harsh realities of his posting on the Kolyma highway. He took one look at Chloe's pale, exhausted face and the crude, blood-stiffened bandage on her hand, and immediately took command. "Bring her in here," he ordered, his Russian baritone a reassuring rumble. He led them down a short, dimly lit corridor to a clean but Spartan examination room. The operational duty officer at the Magadan Regional Directorate called ahead. "They said you had an animal bite. A wolf?" "A lynx kitten," Ben corrected, as he and Mac helped a nearly collapsing Chloe onto the examination table. "It was abnormally aggressive. Our biologist suspects rabies." Dr. Ivanov's brow furrowed as he began to cut away Ben's field dressing. The wound, now fully exposed under the room's single, bare light bulb, was a gruesome sight. The 4 main puncture marks were deep, and the surrounding flesh was a bruised, angry-looking patchwork of purple and red. It was profoundly swollen, hot to the touch. "This is a bad wound," Dr. Ivanov murmured, his experienced eyes cataloging the damage. He gently palpated the area around the bite, his touch surprisingly delicate. Chloe hissed in pain. "The infection I see now is bacterial. The mouth of any animal is filthy. The bite is deep. My primary concern, before anything else, is sepsis." He looked at Ben. "Rabies is a future problem. A wound infection could kill her in 3 days." This new immediate threat jolted the team. They had been so focused on the exotic, neurological horror of rabies that they had overlooked the more common, brutish danger of a simple infection. "First we clean," the doctor declared. "Then antibiotics, then we worry about the rabies." The next hour was an ordeal. Dr. Ivanov meticulously cleaned the wound, a process far more thorough and painful than Ben's field dressing. He administered a powerful, broad-spectrum antibiotic intravenously. The drip stand a small tree of life beside Chloe's cot. Only after he was satisfied that the immediate threat of bacterial infection was being addressed did he turn his attention to the second, more insidious enemy. "Now for the rabies," he said, retrieving a series of vials from a humming, antiquated refrigerator. The post-exposure prophylaxis began, a 2-pronged attack. First came the human rabies immunoglobulin, a concentration of antibodies. "This will hurt," Dr. Ivanov warned Chloe again, his voice gentle. "We must inject most of it directly into and around the wound. We build a wall of soldiers to fight the enemy where it entered." Chloe, her face pale with exhaustion and pain, squeezed her eyes shut and nodded. Max stood by her side, holding her good hand, a silent, steady anchor in a sea of pain. Each injection was a fiery sting, and Chloe couldn't suppress a series of sharp, pained gasps. Finally, the first of 4 shots was administered into her arm. "Next, a vaccine in your upper shoulder," Dr. Ivanov went on. "There," Dr. Ivanov said, applying a fresh, clean bandage. We have fought both the lion at the gates and the serpent in the garden. Now we let her rest. Tomorrow, and a few days after, we administer another dose of vaccine in your shoulder again." He arranged for them to stay in an unused wing of the small hospital. The rooms were stark, but they were warm and safe. That night, the team slept a deep, exhausted sleep, the profound rest that comes after a prolonged period of life-threatening stress. The following days settled into a strange, suspended reality. The relentless forward march was replaced by a quiet, anxious stillness. Chloe was their sun, and the entire team orbited around her. The powerful antibiotics began to work on the bacterial infection. The angry swelling in her hand slowly subsided, the fiery redness fading to a bruised purple. The pain lessened from a raging fire to a dull, manageable throb. This visible improvement created a fragile, hopeful atmosphere in the clinic. The doctor's initial diagnosis had been correct. The immediate danger was passing. By extension, they allowed themselves to believe the second danger, rabies, was also being held at bay by the vaccine. They had made it. They had won. Mac, his mission to save Chloe seemingly successful, reverted to his role as storyteller, taking stark, beautiful portraits of the clinic's small staff. Ben handled satellite communications, carefully crafting his reports to Nat Geo to convey success and control. Only Kira remained a coiled spring of restless energy. She saw the improvement, but her scientific mind was plagued by the inconsistencies. Her first priority was to confirm the rabies diagnosis, a formality she felt compelled to complete. She wanted to send the samples from the kitten's brain tissue for testing. On the second day, she found Ben in the common area. He was meticulously cleaning his satellite phone, a small, satisfying task now that their primary objective had been achieved. He felt a profound sense of relief, the deep calm that follows a successfully completed mission. Her face, however, was a mask of deep, clinical concern. "I want to take the kitten's brain tissue to the regional laboratory in Magadan myself," she said, her tone formal. Ben looked up, a flicker of irritation cutting through his relaxed state. "A side trip? Kira, we can't. Chloe's on the protocol. The doctor is confident. We're safe. We're not chasing ghosts anymore." "I'm not so sure," she replied, her voice tight with a frustration he didn't yet understand. "My field tests are not conclusive." "What do you mean, not conclusive?" he asked, setting the phone down. A knot of dread, one he thought he'd left behind on the trail, began to tighten in his stomach. "I mean, the test for rabies came back negative," she said bluntly. "I have run the PCR test 3 times. The control samples are perfect. The test did not fail. The result is negative. I am a field biologist, Ben, not a virologist. My equipment is good, but it is not definitive. It is possible it is a novel rabies strain my kit is not primed for, or—" She let the thought hang in the air, her face grim. "Or it's something else," Ben finished for her, his voice low. "The symptoms were atypical," she pressed on. "The spasticity, the wheezing, it does not fit the classic profile. I do not have the background to identify what it is, but I know enough to see when the data does not fit the hypothesis. This sample needs to be seen by specialists in Magadan, by people who know what they are doing." Ben's desire for the crisis to be over warred with his trust in Kira's scientific integrity. "Okay, Kira," he conceded. "Let's talk to Ivanov. Maybe he can arrange transport for you down the highway." Their conversation was interrupted by the doctor himself, his expression grave. "It's the girl. Her condition is changing." They found Chloe sitting upright in her bed, her hands pressing a pillow tightly over her face. The overhead lights had been turned off, leaving the room in shadows. The wound on her hand was healing, but a new, terrifying ailment was taking hold. "Turn it off," she pleaded, her voice muffled and frantic. "The light from the window, it hurts. It feels like needles in my eyes." Dr. Ivanov checked her chart, his brow furrowed. Her fever has spiked to 40 degrees Celsius. The antibiotics should be preventing this. Chloe lowered the pillow slightly, revealing eyes that were bloodshot and darting wildly around the room. My head feels full, she whispered, her voice tight with paranoia. There are voices in the static. Why are you all looking at me like that? Stop looking at me. She punctuated the outburst with a sharp, ragged intake of breath. It was a dry, scraping sound, as if her vocal cords were swelling. Her neurological state is deteriorating rapidly, Kira whispered to Ben, stepping back from the bed. Photophobia, paranoia, muscle spasms. The virus has breached the central nervous system. The vaccine was too late. The situation took a catastrophic turn on the 5th day of their stay. A young, earnest nurse named Anya, who had been Chloe's primary caregiver during the first 3 days, called in sick. She reported an abrupt, high fever, severe chest pain, and a harsh, wet cough. Dr. Ivanov, assuming it was a severe seasonal pneumonia, advised rest and fluids at home. By that evening, however, her husband brought her to the clinic. She was significantly worse, flushed with fever and struggling for breath. She was immediately admitted. The 6th day was a descent into medical chaos. Anya's condition deteriorated with a speed that horrified the small clinic staff. The deep, wet cough from the day before became a desperate gasp for air. Her oxygen saturation levels plummeted. Dr. Ivanov put her on oxygen, but it seemed to have little effect. By midday, a distinct bluish tint appeared around her lips. The hypoxia began to affect her mind. She became delirious, alternating between moments of panicked lucidity where she pleaded for help and long stretches of confused muttering. The clinic, once a place of quiet hope, was now filled with the sound of her labored breathing and the frantic, hushed conversations of the terrified staff. The end came on the morning of the 7th day. Ben, Mac, and Kira were huddled in the common area, sleep having been impossible, when a new sound shattered the tense quiet. It was a violent, crashing sound from Anya's room, followed by a scream. They ran into the hallway to see Dr. Ivanov and another nurse struggling to hold Anya down as she fought a frantic, terrified battle for air. The respiratory collapse they had watched develop was culminating in a catastrophic drowning effect. Her lungs had rapidly filled with fluid. Despite Dr. Ivanov's frantic efforts at clearing her airway and resuscitation, Anya asphyxiated before the sun had fully risen. The clinic was plunged into a state of shocked, horrified grief. Dr. Ivanov, his face pale and drawn, immediately ordered a lockdown. He was a good doctor, but he was out of his depth. He had just witnessed a patient die in under 72 hours from an illness that presented like the flu, progressed like the worst kind of pneumonia, and ended with acute respiratory failure. The connection was impossible to ignore. Kira, her face a mask of cold dread, approached him as he stood numbly outside Anya's room. "Doctor," she said, her voice low but clear. "Chloe's symptoms, Anya's symptoms. The progression is entirely different, but they both share contact. We cannot assume they are unrelated." The full, catastrophic weight of the situation finally landed on the old doctor. He had 2 patients with inexplicable, terrifyingly different symptoms and a clear line of contact between them. He was no longer just treating a strange bite wound, he was at ground zero of something unknown. Dr. Ivanov, his face a mask of grim duty, turned without a word and went directly to his desk phone. This time the call was not a request for consultation. It was a declaration of a biological state of emergency. As he spoke in urgent, clipped Russian to the Emergency Response Division at Vector, he was reporting a cascade of inexplicable symptoms. A patient with a bizarre, non-rabies neurological condition from an animal bite who was descending into delirium, and another patient who had just died from a violent respiratory illness after contact with the first. He was reporting chaos. He was pleading for help. Ben could only stare at Chloe's door. He could hear it, even through the thick wood. The faint, rhythmic, and utterly inhuman sound of her persistent, wheezing breath.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the story, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Join us next time for the continuation of this series as the team tries to find a way to help Chloe. Until then, stay safe, and thanks for listening.